Yeah, well, we ran over a little bit. People online don't like waiting. Yeah. So if you don't usually go to class, go back behind the stage here and go celebrate Carolyn. If you do go to class and this isn't yours, go on to your class. If this is yours, welcome. And then after class, we'll go back there and eat cupcakes with Carolyn. So either way, you're getting a cupcake. Doesn't really matter. Everybody gets a cupcake. And they're good. I had to eat 2 of them last night because the icing was the wrong color. So, all righty. Give it just a couple more seconds here for some. That clock up there is 2 minutes fast anyway. If you're joining us online, welcome. If you weren't in worship, we had an announcement of a retirement, so that's what ran over a little bit. Also, you notice that I have 2 chairs up here and one's empty. Dr. Cloud is doing blood pressure readings twice a day at his doctor's suggestion, so they can dial in some medicine. And he got some readings he didn't really like, and so he decided it might be best to not drive 80 miles round trip. So totally understand it. Also, it's not the same when he's not here, so we will just push on, and we'll see what he tells me later this week that we should have said or said differently, and then we can fix it next week. That's about the only thing I know to do. So thank you very much. Dawn says she has every confidence in me that we will do this. So as we've been journeying through Joshua, we have come to the first of the 4 locations of the conquest. And last week we worked right up to the point where the attack or the military effort was going to take place, and we stopped there because that's what we're looking at this week. And that's found in Joshua chapters 2 through 6. And it's Jericho. And like Les did a fantastic job this morning talking about Jericho, the song when we were kids. And I remember the chorus, but I'm not going to sing it. And I don't remember any of the other words, so it probably wouldn't sound too good. But we do know that story. And so what we're going to look at this morning is more detail about Jericho and the fascinating things in the story that maybe when we read it quickly in the Bible, or we make assumptions of what we're reading and how it must have gone because that's the only way that makes sense to us, we miss some of the spectacular evidence of how it actually went. So I hope that will be enlightening to you and help you get excited again about the story of the conquest of Jericho. And then last week, remember this picture, this is the biblical picture that Dr. Cloud likes so much of Joshua that you see, usually in Bible VBS type material, and you see the wall there, and even that was fascinating because you've got several things going on in that picture. When you see the full-blown version like this, you've got the wall, which looks a whole lot like the Great Wall of China, which we've already talked about. The walls weren't necessarily just one level of material. They were a level of material, and then a gap, and then another level of material. And that's why Rahab's house might have actually been in the wall. If you were with us for that study, that would be one way that would be interpreted. But then look down at the bottom. You also have the marching group there and the Ark of the Covenant going with them. And all of that's in the story. The Ark of the Covenant is present. The process that Les described about marching around for the 6 days is all detailed by God on exactly how the conquest of Jericho will take place. And so the sermon, I think, covered pretty well the man with the drawn sword. I just wanted to take a couple of things and show you some archaeological evidence that we can plug in as possibilities, okay? Nothing dogmatic. I'm not telling you that we have found the sword that the angel of the Lord was holding in his hand, because to my knowledge we have not, and I would be surprised if we ever did. But we know some things that would have been period correct that might be possible. So when this was stated in Jericho, which there's a picture of what it looks like today. And remember from last week, we showed you the roughly 6 acres of dirt mound that is now the tell of where biblical Jericho was. And so there's what it looks like in the landscape of today. And this might be a possibility for what the commander of the Lord's army might have been holding, a sickle sword. This was recovered from Gezer, and it dates back to about 1500 to 1200 BC, possible. The other possibility is a bronze sword that would have been maybe more like what we would be probably guessing in our minds would maybe be what it looked like. You might have thought it was a little bit longer or shorter, but you wouldn't think a dagger, so you would think something long enough to be considered a sword. And there's one that is circa around 1200 to 600 BC. And then bronze daggers, which would be smaller. And like I said, I not personally would think of that. I would think of a sword being something bigger than something that could be concealed like a dagger. But there's 2 bronze daggers that were found from approximately 1300 to 1200 BC. But this is maybe what the scene would have looked like. And I'm hoping that if Juanita and Dr. Cloud are watching right now, that he's chuckling, because I did not have a hard time finding this picture without wings on the individual talking to him. And here would be the reason. We know this is a heavenly being, right? But the text tells us he looked like a man. So even the artists have not gone into that kind of gray area of assuming that since it's from heaven, it has to be something that has wings and a halo. He does not have wings and a halo. He looks just like an ordinary man, like we said this morning in the sermon. And that's why Joshua, that's what engenders the question from Joshua of, hey, are you with us or with them? Not, hey, where are you from? You clearly are not from this world. That's not what he says. He says, are you with them or with us? So he can't tell when he first sees him that he is not just like himself. He's not just a regular human being who's standing there with a sword ready to go to battle. I do find fascinating that if he had said he was for the enemy, what would Joshua have thought would happen? Now, I know that we could speculate. That's not part of the story, but that dawned on me this morning. I was sitting there in the pew before I went up for my part of the sermon, and I was thinking, yeah, when he says neither, what if he had said, yeah, I'm for the enemy? It'd be like, well, let's go ahead and get this done now, I guess. I mean, we're going to have a one-on-one, a mano battle, right? But no. And so Joshua was pretty brave. Just my point is, he's pretty brave just asking the guy, because he could have said he was for the enemy. He didn't know. But instead, he wasn't for the enemy or for the Israelites, because he's God. And so that's an artist rendering of what it might look like, and that was painted in 1899. And then here's some interesting stuff, and this one's kind of hard to see. There's one that's going to be coming that's a little bit clearer. He says, no, but I come as the captain of the army of Yahweh. And here's a Hebrew inscription that has been found that actually mentions Yahweh of armies, and it's from the 8th century BC. And when you put the text on there, there's where it was. It was kind of hard to see with everything being sandstone colored. So that's the ancient script. That's even before what we normally show you when we're in here in class and we show you Hebrew. That's the ancient script that had the kind of the intermediary state between pictures of like water, when Dr. Cloud's shown you how we got the N for the Nile, because the river was so important. Their water is the letter N for Nile. Water for us comes from Hebrew mayim, so we get it as an M. But this is before that. This is like in between the pictures and the clarity of the letters we have now. But the point is that it says Yahweh of armies. And I meant to include in my part this morning and just forgot, there's a synonym for armies. Some of your Bibles may say Lord of hosts, or the commander of the heavenly host. That's everything Yahweh's made. That's all beings that are less than God himself. And that's actually what the commander of the army is saying he's the commander of. He is the commander of absolutely everything that Yahweh has made that is less than Yahweh, that is less than God, because, well, he's equal to God, and so that's why he's the commander. And there it is, found in archaeology, which is just fascinating. And so the next verse says, and Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshiped. And I wanted to just show you that was also not foreign. Obviously, we can stay in our Bibles and we can say, well, like I did this morning, Abraham did this, Jacob did this, Moses did this. Yes. But other cultures did it too. Here's a relief of Jehu, who actually is in our Bible, by the way. Jehu of Israel bowing down before Shalmaneser III from the black obelisk. And he's offering worship to Shalmaneser. And That's problematic. I understand that. We don't have time to go into that. But the point is the posture is a known posture that was not just biblical. It was of the time. So if you were worshiping anything, whether it be another person or whether it be a false god or whether it be Yahweh, the posture that a human would take would be the same. So this is not something that would be unknown or unable to be understood from other civilizations. Here's another example. Here's Pharaoh Necho I kneeling in reverence before his gods. So he doesn't have his face to the ground like Jehu did and like the text tells us that Joshua did, but that would be the next step. He would go to his knees, and then the next step would be to lower his torso and have his face to the ground. And then the reference of you're standing on holy ground, here's just a picture of a Mount Sinai, the traditional Mount Sinai area, reminding us that that was stated to Moses. Take off your sandals, for the place you're standing is holy, and that's the exact same thing that is said to Joshua. And just some pictures there, you know what humans' feet look like. And so we go back to Jericho then, because the sermon didn't really have a lot of time to go into detail here. So this is where we'll spend our time this morning. Jericho was said to be shut tightly because of the Israelites. If you just stop right there and think, what in the world does that mean? What did the Israelites do, and what does shut tightly mean? Well, remember what we've been laying the groundwork for up to this point. Last week we talked about the giant Og and being defeated by the Israelites. We've had Rahab say, oh, I know who you people are. You're with the God who split the Red Sea. You're with the God who has defeated these enemies that we know we couldn't defeat, and they're shaking in their boots or their hearts are melting, whichever phrase you want to use. So what it's saying is they're so scared of the Israelites that they have gone on lockdown. That's what Jericho is experiencing. And it's shut tightly, meaning that it's under heavy, heavy, heavy security. No one's coming and going. It's a special situation, heightened security. No one's coming in or going out, is what the next verse says. No one was allowed to leave or enter. And the Lord told Joshua, see, I'm about to defeat Jericho for you, along with its king and its warriors, which it couldn't get much clearer than that. Yahweh is going to defeat Jericho for him. And he even specifies the king and the warriors. And we're going to look at what he does with the king here in a bit. Have all the warriors march around the city one time. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry 7 ram's horns in front of the ark. And on the 7th day, march around the city 7 times while the priests blow the horns. When you hear the signal from the ram's horn, have the whole army give a loud battle cry. Then the city wall will collapse, and the warriors should charge straight ahead. Well, there's several things in this. You notice the repetition of 7. 7 priests, 7 laps around the city, 7 blows of the horns. 7 is the number of perfection or completion. That's why God rested on the 7th day of creation. So everyone pretty much is in complete agreement that that's the significance of 7 here, is that the reason this is happening is it again is pointing to God is doing it, not humans. And the 7 reiterates that thought that we're just obeying and doing what God's asked us to do. But what is really happening is the being who is perfect, the being who is perfection and completion is who's giving us this victory. And so that's why 7 is in there that many times. And then we're going to look at things like the capture of the king and the way the walls fell. So here's a picture you should remember from last week. This is the mound or the tell of Jericho, roughly 6 acres, and that's approximately what it still looks like. And so it's very difficult to tell from that what in the world a shut-up city would look like, right? But look at this. I don't know. I was really hoping that Rodney would give me some probability of exactly how accurate this is. But this is from much investigation and deduction. You see down in the lower right-hand corner, you see the little blue guys, and two of them have the Ark of the Covenant between them. To scale, what is suggested is that the first part of the wall of Jericho is the 12 feet of what's called like an earthen wall. So behind that wall is nothing but dirt, which the previous picture, it shouldn't surprise us because that's what it looks like, right? It looks like 6 acres of just a mound of dirt. And so the wall up against that dirt would have been for stability and to build height, right? And then the wall above that was 25 feet tall. But that was the first wall. And then the way the city went up, the second wall, where the guards and the archers could fire arrows and whatnot, was up another 46 feet. And so you could see where if you attacked this city, you would have a pretty good chance of not being very successful. First of all, you've got to get up to where the wall starts. That's the wall that you actually need to climb, scale, and flip over. And while you're doing all this, you've got somebody with defenses that are up high enough that they can see you down below and target you. So it was quite the feat with a section of 2 city walls. And this is approximately from 1400 BC what they're suggesting that it would have been constructed like. So hopefully that helps on why many things we've talked about. Space between the walls, in the wall, on the wall, and the fact that the city was so well fortified. As far as the shut up part goes, just different examples of different structures that are, let's just say, similar to what we're talking about. Obviously, this is from a church building. This is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which some of you in this room have probably been to, or some of you online if you've traveled with Dr. Cloud and his 22 trips over to Israel. So not a city gate, but you can see this. You can see the concept of when it's time to shut this, it's shut, and it's shut with multiple latches, and it's no windows, no light coming through. I mean, it's completely closed. Similarly, here's the Damascus gate. And when it's closed, you're not getting through there. You're not getting on the other side of that wall. So it might be more like that we could envision in our minds. Or the new gate in Jerusalem closed during disturbances, and this is from 1938. And again, no windows, no portholes, nothing. It's almost like when the gates are closed, it's almost like the wall is completely a wall. You know those signs that you see? I should have put one in here for a little bit of humor. You know those signs that you see from time to time on a door that says this door is to remain closed at all times? And I always turn to Cheryl and say, then why is it a door? Why didn't they just make it a wall? Well, that's pretty much what happens when the gates are closed and the city's shut up, is it is just a wall. It may have doors, but effectively it doesn't, because you can't do anything with them. And then he says in the text, I have given Jericho into your hand in verse 2. And here's an example of a relief where soldiers at Lachish are defending themselves against Assyrian attack. Reason for these types of things is, I know everybody in here is comfortable with what the Bible says, and we don't need outside sources to tell us, well, we're going to believe the Bible now because we found something outside the Bible that makes us think that the Bible's probably true. We're not in that boat. We know what's in the Bible's true. Yet when we find things outside the Bible that are very similar to things that are in the Bible, it does give us a glimpse into what it would be like to have been alive in that time. It's not like biblical people were radically different than all the people around them. They didn't do things in life that were totally different. They didn't have, airplanes before anybody else, or they didn't have telephones before anybody else. I mean, I know those are exaggerations, but I'm doing it on purpose. Biblical people were just like non-biblical people, and non-biblical people did a lot of the same things biblical people did, right? And when we learn from that, we're able to see a bigger picture of what was going on in Scripture. So this is just an example of what an attack by a known enemy, the Assyrians, and a known battle in Lachish, and what it would have looked like. And this would be the point of putting this in here. This is what Jericho's expecting the Israelites to do. That's why we put these in here. If you lived then and someone said, well, we're getting ready to be attacked. Well, I wonder if they're going to march around the city 7 times and blow horns and then say, shout something. No, they think, well, if we're going to be attacked, it's going to look like this. Because when other people have been attacked in our time, this is what it looks like. So this is what they would be expecting would happen to them. And then another interesting thing, and Dr. Cloud's done a lot of research on this, and in one of his classes, I actually did a presentation, and he assigned it to me, and I learned a lot about the Amarna letters. But these Amarna letters are cuneiform tablets like the one that's up there. So somebody took soft clay and actually wrote in the clay while it was soft, and then they've hardened, and they're tablets of almost like sandstone that now are these letters. And the reason they're important is they're from dignitaries and military officials from different cultures and societies to other ones. And one of them is the one that is communicating about what's called signal fires. Like if you have a problem, and you've got a companion group, many miles away, you light a fire, and they know you're still good, because if your fire's lit and smoke is visible, then you haven't been captured, right? Because if the enemy comes in and captures you and they snuff that out and the smoke stops, then I know from where I am, our people at wherever have been captured, right? Well, the Amarna letters talk about that, and they talk about the signal fires, and they talk about Jericho. And so it's just fascinating that we actually have non-biblical evidence of this city and the city falling. We don't just have a mound of dirt that someone points at and says, oh, this is biblical Jericho, and no one will know the difference because no one's alive who can contest it. I don't know if you've ever feared about that. I haven't. I think there's a lot of people who are truthful and want to tell you the truth. But critics and skeptics might say that. And things like this tell us, no, that's not the case, because there was a Jericho, it did fall, and it also was burned, which we're going to look at here in a second. We've talked about shofars here at Hendersonville before. One lesson I did, the Judaism study about looking at Jesus and the festivals that he went to and the things he would have done. We looked at shofars, and Les actually brought one in here. But here's a picture of a man blowing one. It's just a ram's horn, and I can assure you it's very hard to make anything that sounds like an intentional musical sound from it. If you ever get the chance to try it, you'll know what I'm talking about. And then here's ancient Jericho from an aerial view from the south. So you can see there's where the walls would have been around, and there's the built-up area that would have explained that higher level of wall up at the top, and then the lower level at wall down near the road level, or the walking level. Here's another man blowing a shofar, because again, they blew them 7 times, and they had 7 people blowing them. And then here is a idea. This is not my idea. I know it's drastically different than the Raiders of the Lost Ark that was made, but I think this is too plain. I think the one in the Bible probably was a little bit more elaborate than this. But here's someone's idea of an Ark of the Covenant replica, and it's still on display over in Jerusalem. And so the text reminds us that the ark is going in front. And this is important too. We might say, well, going back to what I was saying a while ago, well, this is biblical story, and we know the Ark of the Covenant, and so we're not surprised that the Ark of the Covenant's there. Fine, all good, correct? But would it surprise you that arks like this with deities were not just in the Bible? Other deities had boxes that were carried the same way. Because again, we're living in a time where there are people who are Yahwehists and believers and people who are not. And I found that very remarkable, actually, that this is a process that would have been known to people. So what does that mean? That means that when someone sees this, okay, remember, I'm trying to keep us in perspective of we're in Jericho and we're getting ready to be attacked, and you see people marching around with a box on poles being carried by men. You know what that means. You know that's the representation of the God who is attacking your city. Because the other civilizations that have their boxes to whoever their God is do the same thing. So when you look out from Jericho, you're not going to be like, what is this deal? What are they doing carrying a box around? I have no idea what that means. No, you know exactly what it means. It's the representation of Yahweh going before them in preparation to take out your city. Here's an example. Here's a stela depicting the amun carried by priests, another word for box, from Koptos of the 19th dynasty. And you can see it there. You see it's a little different. They've got their pole, and it's up at head level. It's not down close to the ground. But again, this is something that if you lived at that time, you would understand what is going on here, what this is signifying. And then another shofar and a book in Hebrew that tells you how to play it. I'm sure if we all got that, we could start a band by this evening. We could have a shofar concert. Look at this one. Here's priests shall blow the trumpets. Again, is this just biblical priests do this? No, actually, here's a relief of Sargon II with a war camp and officials blowing trumpets. And look at what's in their hand. They're shaped a little differently, but we're not talking about the 3-valve brass thing that kids play in high school band. We're talking about a ram's horn or something very similar. So again, these are things that are going on that signify what Yahweh's doing, and the culture would understand the blowing of horns, a box carried by people as representative of their God, and they would also understand other elements that are from the known culture and known time. All right, so let's look at the wall. So down at the bottom, when I was saying that there's 12 feet of wall that was up against the dirt, right, might be like this. Now the problem here is a lot of times you'll find pictures like this and they'll say, here is the wall of Jericho and you think, wait a minute, I thought the wall of Jericho was totally destroyed. It was. Actually, when you look at stuff really closely, you'll find that this is a wall of Jericho that has been reconstructed to give us the idea of what it might look like. So this is actually not part of the wall that somehow got missed, because as we know, the walls all came completely down. But what is interesting is you can see how it has a lower section and an upper section, and it has earth behind it. It wasn't just this wall with people standing directly on the other side of it. Here's a repeat from a couple weeks ago. This is just, and Joshua the son of Nun called the priests. This is going through the text. This is verse 6 of chapter 6. And here's the street sign that shows that, Yehoshua was a real person and even has a street named after him. And the street even tells you that he's the son of N-U-N, Nun, which is directly lined up with the Bible text. Ark of the Covenant in the Holy of Holies as a model tabernacle. Take up the Ark of the Covenant is mentioned again in verse 6. So now it's moving again. Here's another possible interpretation, let's say, of the Ark of the Covenant. Pass on and encircle the city. So here's the Jericho tell from the south, and you can imagine how many people you'd have to encircle the city, right? This is going to take several people to get around 6 acres, and that's what they would be surrounding, is what's left there. And what it would look like is, this was interesting, pass on and encircle the city. Well, what it basically is saying is the Israelite camp is away from the city, obviously. You're not going to camp right up against your enemy. You're going to travel in from your campsite, you're going to encircle the city, and then you're going to go back to your campsite. So this is a satellite-type image of what it would probably look like of where the Israelites would be, how they would have gotten in to encircle Jericho, and then how they would get back to their camp. So let the armed men pass on before the ark of Yahweh. And here's a relief of warriors from the King's Gate royal buttress of Carchemish from the 9th century BC. So again, examples of what is going on in the story of the Israelites conquering Jericho, that people would know and be accustomed to these types of practices happening, because other armies and other civilizations have done the same thing. And then the 7 priests carrying the 7 trumpets of ram's horns before Yahweh went ahead. So they go ahead of the Ark of the Covenant. You got the 7 priests with the 7 shofars, and then you got the Ark of the Covenant coming behind them. And so this might be what it would have looked like. This is another painting by the same artist from 1899 that painted the picture of Joshua interacting with the commander of the Lord's army. And that's from verse 8 of chapter 6. And so, look here. Here's a relief of priests carrying the same type thing as the Ark of the Covenant for Ramses II. And this is found over in Egypt. And so, again, this is just another example of what we haven't slowed down oftentimes and thought of. We read our Bible stories, and I think sometimes, unfortunately, we read them in a vacuum, where we think that what goes on in the Bible is what goes on in the Bible. And then in quote unquote real life, different things go on. But as we can see, real life and biblical life were basically the same, except that Yahweh is the true and most high and creator God, and the Israelites worshipped him, and his equipment and his processes differentiated themselves from the others in multiple ways. One way is, again, this is sort of non-violent or less violent, the way the initial attack happens at Jericho, because you got horns being blown and a parade being done, and then the walls fall down, and obviously the army is not responsible for those walls falling down. And they came into the camp and spent the night in the camp. And here's an encampment relief from the northwest palace of Ashurnashirpal II in Nimrud, which is also Nineveh. And so just another example of what people have documented that the encampments might look like, and other cultures, other people groups in the ancient Near East doing the same thing. And Joshua rose early in the morning, it says in verse 12. Here's just a nice sunrise over the Dead Sea from En-Gedi. So that might have been something like what Joshua would have risen to see. And it came to pass at the seventh time when the priest blew the trumpet. So here's yet another person blowing a shofar, because that's how many times in the text the shofars are blown. And Joshua said, "Shout, for Yahweh has given you the city." And here's an example of a crowd shouting for joy at the declaration of the state of Israel, May 14th, 1948. So same area of the world, big crowd shouting. Maybe it looked like that. Don't really know. Not really sure what they shouted, but they did shout, and they gave the signal, and then the walls come down. All right, so here's where it gets very interesting for me. Again, not trying to convince you that we have to have things that prove to us the Bible's true. The other way around. We know the Bible's true, and isn't it interesting that archaeology finds things that people scratch their head and say, now why would it be that way? And you go over to the Bible and say, because the Bible says right here this, and so that's why it's that way. This is an example of that. These are grain jars that were found in the ruins there in the tell at Jericho. And you might say, well, so what? Well, here's what's really fascinating. If you had storage of food and supplies because you thought you might see a day when you would get attacked, what would they be for? They'd be for survival while you're trying to negotiate what's going on, right? You got peaches put away, Hugh, and you've got sweet potatoes, and you got apples, and you got whatever else you've got, and you've got water, and you've got all your stuff there for like days, weeks, possibly months of negotiations before whatever's going to happen is going to happen, right? Well, these were all full of grain. They didn't eat any of it. It was like there was no opportunity to use their storages, because when God said, give the word and the walls came down, it was on. There wasn't any like, well, we've started to be attacked, go to your safe place, and we'll live out of our safe place for a while. It'll take a while for them to attack the whole city and conquer all of us. No, it didn't. It was instant. And so all their supplies were still in the grain jars, which I thought was really interesting. And then we'll come back to the grain jars here in a minute, and it gets even more interesting. And so the text says in verse 17, only Rahab the prostitute shall live, she and all that were with her in the house. And remember from our study last week, she had to go get her family, because her house in the wall was her place of business, not her father's house that the whole family lived under. So when the spies said, we will do this deal with you, it was contingent on her getting her father, her mother, and all that belonged to her father's house into the same location, so that when this day came, they could save them all. And she did that. She had gathered them all together, and they were in her house, and they were saved, and no one else was. Keep yourselves from the things under the ban, in verse 18. Maybe your translation says a different word from ban, but basically the things that God has said are for him, keep yourself from those. And this is interesting because this is, again, another example of where societies did this for their gods as well. So this is a statue, I guess you would call it, of making bearers of offerings from the tomb of the governor of there. I'll let you pronounce that. I know I won't get that one right. From about 1900 BC. And so this is a known process. If your deity helped you conquer and win something, you gave your deity honor by giving the deity the first fruits, the spoils from the conquering or whatever. And so if other people groups were doing that for gods lesser than Yahweh, it would make sense that Israel would do that for Yahweh. Think about it. If they didn't, other societies would say what? They don't honor their God enough to even do what we do for ours when they win a battle? They don't give him the rights that he has for helping them? That seems odd. So some of the practices that the other cultures did for their deities, God is asking Israel to do the same. Here's another one where there's just more going to a procession of offering from around the same time there, 1900. And then here are some of the things that the text literally says. It says, but all the silver and the gold and the vessels of bronze and iron, they are to be holy to Yahweh. Well, here's some of the examples of, here's cut pieces of silver from the 7th century BC. These are the types of things that would go to God, probably be melted down, turned into something else. That's how he instructed them to make the Ark of the Covenant. That's how a lot of the tabernacle facilities were made. So we know that gold, silver, and bronze were reserved for the Lord for many different purposes. Here's some other pieces. This is hacked silver from Shiloh from the 18th to 16th centuries BC. And then, of course, here's what gold would look like. Gold plaque of a goddess, perhaps Annette, on a horse from Lachish from the 13th century BC. So again, other cultures who are honoring their God with gold, of course the Israelites need to honor Yahweh with gold. And because think about it, we know that those things are meaningless to God, right? He doesn't need our gold or our silver or our bronze. But it's the message that his followers are sending to the other cultures if they didn't do that, because the other cultures do it. So they need to do it as well. Here's a bronze wine set from a tomb from the 13th century BC, and as you can see, it's turned green, just like we are accustomed to seeing with copper and things like that, even nowadays. But here's what really gets interesting. The wall fell down flat so that the people went right into the city, every man straight before him. And as Dr. Cloud might have already mentioned, I think he did, these walls fell outward. They didn't fall inward. And there's evidence of that. Why? Because the earth dirt that was behind that initial 12 feet, that part of the wall came down too. So there's no way you could have attacked that and knocked it down that way, because it would have just gone into the earthen wall that's behind it, right? All the walls fell outward, and everything fell away from the city, making basically just ramps of come right on in. Now there's nothing that's prohibiting you from entering. Here's an example from Bryant Wood, who's a famous archaeologist that's done a lot of work around Jericho, of the collapsed mud brick wall. So this would be an example of where the wall would have been in front of that section of earth. Another picture of a wall. The wall fell down flat, and so that would have come outward. I'm not exactly sure where that orientation is, but that's a mud brick wall at Jericho as well. But here's the next part. I was telling you we'd come back to the jars, we'd come back to the grain storage. So when they got in there and they started excavating, there's a level of the excavation that shows burned level, like charred, like everything was set on fire, which again, the Bible already told us that. And here's archaeological evidence showing us that. And when they went in and they burned the entire city and saved only Rahab and her family, here's the burnt layer, and then look, there's where the grain storage jars were found. So not only were they full of grain that they didn't eat from their reserves, they were burned, because that was the level that it was at when the siege actually happened. And there's another picture of the jars with grain in them and also charred up from being burned. They utterly destroyed all that was in the city, both man and woman, both young and old. We got a little bit more time than that clock says. I'm going to tell you something about that in a second. Here's a man plowing with oxen. There was what a family might have looked like. The spies went in and brought out Rahab. Probably not what Rahab looked like. This person's probably a little bit too old, but there's an idea. Rahab's house that we talked about last week, over at the wall, in the wall, right near where modern day Jericho is today. And then they burned the city with fire. That's actually what the Hebrew says, just in case you were confused, that they burned it with something else. They burned it with fire and everything that was in it. And so there's a great picture of fire from going along with verse 24. And here's another relief where fire was used in Sargon. He set a city on fire as well. So this was, again, not something that people would not be like, well, now here comes the fire part. Here's where we actually have the city get destroyed. It's not conquered to be inhabited. It's conquered to be destroyed, which is why the fire is used. And then a relief of others giving silver and gold tribute to Shalmaneser III from the Black Obelisk. So again, another example of the same types of things. All right, so here's what I want to do before we end. I want to look at this statement right here. This is in the teaching material that I gave to the teachers, but that statement in verse 21, utterly destroy the city, both men, women, ox, sheep, donkeys, everything they had, right? It makes us pause and say, what in the world is going on? If Israel is called by Yahweh to be a people group for the sake of the other nations so that they can see what it's like to be in relationship with the Creator God, and the point is to pull people out of those other nations to Yahweh, then how in the world does it make sense for Yahweh to tell Israel to destroy one of those other nations before one of those other nations has gotten to know his people well enough to call the people out, and instead he kills them? Doesn't that seem illogical? The point that we miss is the people in those other cities, the people in Jericho, the people who have done these things with these other gods and a whole bunch of stuff that you have to read my dissertation or talk to me later, or we'll have another class about some of this because it's too deep for a minute and a half. They're not Yahweh created people. Yahweh's not saying, I'm taking some of my imagers and I'm eliminating some of my other imagers. He's saying, I'm taking my people who are allegiant to me, and I'm wiping out the people who are not mine, who are allegiant to the gods that are my enemies. And so his enemies and the followers of his enemies are why they get wiped out. They're not his people following the wrong God. They're not his people following the enemy of his. And that's why a statement like that is made. Because otherwise we sit and we say, whew, and I've heard people say it, I don't like the God of the Old Testament. He's mean, and well, you're not seeing what's actually going on, because Jesus comes in the New Testament and tells us to love our enemies, because guess what? The only enemies that are left in creation now are ours. There's not any enemies left of God's, because Jesus defeated them on the cross. But before that, there were enemies of God, and those enemies of God had people who he also said, get rid of the people who support those enemies as well. So you have to reread the Old Testament in a different lens in order to see it that way. But I think that's the intended way and the healthier way to read it. Otherwise, we have a lot of questions about God's morals with people that he wiped out. So for the week ahead, Yahweh often breaks with our logic, just like we just said, so that we will trust his strength. Walls do not come down by themselves, but by obedience. What are some examples of walls in your life that need to come down? What is one step of obedience Yahweh may be asking you to take to trust his strength to knock down your walls? And of course, that's metaphor talk, right? But it's true. There's things that God can do just by, when he tells us, either when he tells the Israelites, be still and watch me win the battle for you, or march around sometimes and blow these trumpets and carry the Ark of the Covenant, and I will give you the city. He does. So it could be just that simple. And instead of us trying to do it of our own power, rely on him doing it. And so that leads me to this week's prayer suggestion. And I'll just read it. God, Help us to see that nothing is impossible for you. We pray for the courage to follow in Jesus' footsteps no matter where they lead. When facing a human impossibility equal to crossing the Red Sea or conquering giants or defeating adversaries that we are powerless to defeat, or having walls fall that we had nothing to do with, gently remind us that it was you and not us. Thank you. In the name of Jesus, amen. Have a blessed day and enjoy the weather. Maybe it's supposed to rain today. And come back for the Chosen tonight, and I'll see you later. Thanks.